Judge Evelyn Harper entered Courtroom 3 with the same calm confidence that had defined her career for nearly 2 decades. The quiet conversations among attorneys stopped almost instantly as she took her seat behind the polished wooden bench. Reporters sitting near the back straightened their notebooks. Defendants lowered their eyes. Even veteran prosecutors adjusted their posture whenever she entered the room. Respect followed her wherever she went, earned through years of uncompromising decisions and an unwavering belief that justice should never bend to sympathy. She carried herself with remarkable discipline. Every movement seemed measured, every word carefully chosen. Her black judicial robe concealed every trace of personal emotion, allowing only authority to remain visible. Newspapers frequently described her as the state's most fearless judge, praising her refusal to yield to political pressure, public outrage, or emotional courtroom pleas. Television commentators often pointed to Evelyn Harper as an example of integrity within an imperfect justice system. That morning's hearing involved a violent gang leader accused of ordering multiple murders from inside prison. The defendant leaned back confidently, flashing a mocking smile as witnesses entered the courtroom. His attorney argued aggressively, attempting to discredit evidence and intimidate surviving victims through relentless questioning. Judge Harper remained unmoved. "The court will not tolerate intimidation," she said firmly. Her voice was calm, yet it carried enough authority to silence the courtroom instantly. When the defense attorney attempted another theatrical interruption, Evelyn removed her glasses and looked directly at him. "Counselor," she said evenly, "you may argue the law. You may not manipulate these proceedings. Sit down." Without another word, the attorney obeyed. Several spectators exchanged impressed glances. They had seen judges lose control under pressure before, but never Evelyn Harper. She ruled with precision, never raising her voice, never allowing personal feelings to cloud legal judgment. By the end of the hearing, the gang leader's request for a reduced sentence was denied. Outside the courthouse, reporters crowded near the courthouse steps, hoping for a statement. "Judge Harper," one journalist called, "do you believe violent offenders deserve second chances?" Evelyn paused only briefly before answering. "Every defendant deserves a fair trial," she replied. "Justice is measured by evidence, not emotion." It was another quote destined to appear in tomorrow's newspapers. As cameras flashed, she offered a polite smile before entering her black sedan, leaving behind another successful day in a career that many younger judges hoped to emulate. No one watching her leave could have imagined that the woman celebrated for enforcing the law carried secrets capable of shattering every principle she publicly represented. The drive home took nearly 40 minutes through quiet suburban neighborhoods lined with towering oak trees. As the courthouse disappeared behind her, the confident expression she had worn throughout the day slowly faded. The sharp posture relaxed. Her shoulders sank slightly against the leather seat. For the first time all day, she looked tired. Home was no longer a place of comfort. The Harper residence stood at the end of a peaceful cul-de-sac, elegant yet strangely lifeless. Fresh flowers decorated the front entrance, perfectly trimmed hedges surrounded the property, and every window gleamed with careful maintenance. From the outside, it reflected the image of a successful family. Inside, silence had become permanent. Her husband, Daniel Harper, once admired her ambition. During the early years of their marriage, they celebrated promotions, traveled together, and dreamed about growing old side by side. Over time, however, court schedules replaced conversations. Long evenings became longer. Vacations disappeared beneath endless legal responsibilities. Daniel eventually stopped asking whether she would be home for dinner. Instead, he simply ate alone. When Evelyn entered the kitchen that evening, Daniel glanced up briefly from his newspaper. "Long day?" he asked. "They're all long." He nodded without looking at her again. Neither of them attempted to continue the conversation. The quiet between them had become more familiar than affection itself. Dinner passed with little more than the sound of silverware touching porcelain plates. Once, they would have laughed together over small stories from work or debated weekend plans. Now they avoided eye contact as though conversation itself required too much effort. Emotional distance had settled between them so gradually that neither could remember exactly when it began. After dinner, Daniel disappeared into his study, while Evelyn remained alone in the dining room, staring at untouched coffee growing cold beside her. Her phone vibrated once. She looked at the screen. No name appeared, only a single unread notification. She quickly locked the phone before anyone could see it, slipping it quietly into her pocket. A faint smile crossed her face for only a second before disappearing. Upstairs, a spare bedroom had recently been prepared for a returning family member. Claire Donovan, Daniel's daughter from his first marriage, had spent the past several years completing graduate school several states away. Intelligent, curious, and compassionate, Claire had inherited her father's quiet nature, but possessed an investigative mind that often noticed details others ignored. She had decided to return home, hoping to rebuild relationships that time and distance had weakened. Daniel welcomed the news with genuine excitement. Evelyn welcomed it with careful politeness. The following afternoon, Claire's car pulled into the driveway carrying little more than a few suitcases and years of missed family memories. Daniel embraced his daughter tightly. "It's good to have you home," he said warmly. "I've missed this place." Claire replied with a smile. Evelyn stepped forward next. "Welcome back, Claire." "Thank you, Evelyn." Their hug was brief and formal, marked more by courtesy than affection. Still, Claire remained optimistic. She believed time could heal strained relationships. She hoped family dinners, shared conversations, and ordinary routines would slowly reconnect them all. She noticed little things during her first evening back. Evelyn often checked her phone without explanation. She occasionally drifted into thought during conversations before suddenly returning with rehearsed smiles. Once or twice, she quietly excused herself to another room for private calls that ended almost as quickly as they began. Claire dismissed each observation. Judges handled sensitive matters every day. Privacy came with responsibility. There had to be reasonable explanations. Late that night, after everyone else had gone to bed, Evelyn stood alone beside an upstairs window overlooking the quiet street. She opened the same anonymous message she had hidden earlier. Only a few words appeared on the screen. "I miss you. When will you visit again?" Evelyn stared at the message for several long seconds before typing a careful reply. Then she deleted it. Instead, she slipped the phone into her pocket and gazed into the darkness beyond the glass. Her expression filled not with fear, but longing. Far beyond the peaceful neighborhood, behind layers of steel doors, surveillance cameras, and concrete walls, someone waited patiently for her next visit. Neither Daniel nor Claire had any idea that the strongest bond in Judge Evelyn Harper's life existed inside a maximum security prison, where a single inmate guarded a secret capable of destroying them all. Claire settled back into life at the Harper residence far more quickly than she had expected. The familiar neighborhood, the quiet streets, and her father's gentle routine made the house feel welcoming despite the emotional distance that lingered between its occupants. She spent her mornings helping Daniel organize old family photographs and her afternoons searching for work with local nonprofit organizations. On the surface, everything seemed peaceful. Yet the image of Evelyn standing alone by the upstairs window with that unreadable expression refused to leave Claire's mind. She told herself she was imagining things. Judges carried enormous responsibilities. Confidential calls and unpredictable schedules were simply part of Evelyn's profession. Still, as the days passed, small details accumulated with uncomfortable consistency. One Tuesday evening, shortly after dinner, Evelyn's phone vibrated while the family sat in the living room. She glanced at the screen only briefly before rising from her chair. "I need to take this," she said calmly. Daniel barely looked up from his book. "Work, as always." She disappeared onto the back patio, closing the sliding glass door behind her. Claire continued watching television, but her attention drifted outside. Evelyn paced slowly beneath the porch light, speaking so quietly that not a single word reached the house. The conversation lasted barely 3 minutes before she ended the call, took several deep breaths, and returned wearing the same composed expression she displayed in court. "You seem busy," Claire remarked casually. Evelyn smiled politely. The justice system never sleeps. The answer sounded rehearsed. Over the following week, similar interruptions became increasingly common. Sometimes the calls arrived after midnight. Other times they came before sunrise. Each conversation followed the same pattern. Evelyn stepped outside or locked herself inside her study, always speaking softly and never allowing anyone close enough to overhear. Daniel seemed completely unconcerned. "She's always been married to her career," he said one morning while pouring coffee. "I've stopped trying to compete with the courthouse." Claire forced a smile but said nothing. Her curiosity deepened a few days later when she returned home unexpectedly after canceling a lunch meeting. Evelyn's car was gone despite having mentioned she would spend the afternoon reviewing case files from home. Thinking little of it, Claire called the courthouse to leave a message. The receptionist hesitated. "I'm sorry," the woman said. "Judge Harper already left several hours ago." "Left?" "Yes. She signed out around noon." Claire thanked her and ended the call. If Evelyn had left the courthouse hours earlier, where had she gone? When Evelyn returned shortly before sunset, she carried no files, no legal folders, and offered no explanation. "Tough afternoon?" Claire asked lightly. "Routine administrative work," Evelyn answered while placing her purse on the hallway table. "At the courthouse?" "Yes." Claire studied her expression. There was no hesitation, no nervousness, only absolute confidence. Still, something about the answer felt incomplete. A few mornings later, another unusual detail appeared. The mail carrier delivered several ordinary bills along with a thick cream-colored envelope bearing no return address. Before Daniel could reach for it, Evelyn stepped forward. "I'll take that." Her voice came faster than usual. She slipped the envelope beneath a stack of legal documents without opening it in front of anyone. Claire noticed. "So did Daniel. Private court business?" he asked. "Confidential paperwork." Daniel nodded immediately. Claire remained unconvinced. Over the next month, more envelopes arrived. Some were small. Others contained several folded pages. None displayed a sender's name. Each time, Evelyn collected them personally before disappearing into her study. One evening, Claire happened to walk past the partially open office door. Inside, Evelyn sat alone at her desk reading handwritten pages instead of official legal documents. The paper looked aged, covered in neat cursive writing unlike anything produced by government offices. Claire knocked gently. Evelyn startled. She quickly folded the pages. "I didn't realize you were there. I was just wondering if you'd like tea." "No, thank you." The conversation ended almost immediately. As Claire walked away, she heard the unmistakable sound of a desk drawer locking. Days later, another incident quietly added to the growing puzzle. Claire volunteered at a community legal aid center located only 2 blocks from the county courthouse. While leaving work one evening, she noticed Evelyn's sedan parked near the employee entrance long after normal court hours. Most of the courthouse lights were already dark. Only a handful of offices remained illuminated. Curious, Claire glanced toward the entrance. Nearly 20 minutes passed. Finally, Evelyn emerged carrying a slim leather briefcase. Instead of driving home, however, she turned in the opposite direction. Claire frowned. She knew the route well. It did not lead toward their neighborhood. By the time Evelyn arrived home nearly 2 hours later, she calmly explained that an emergency judicial conference had delayed her schedule. Again, Daniel accepted the explanation without question. Claire simply nodded. But another small crack had appeared in the flawless image Evelyn carefully maintained. Far beyond the quiet suburbs, behind electrified fencing, armed guard towers, and reinforced steel gates, another routine unfolded with equal precision. Blackwood State Penitentiary housed some of the state's most dangerous criminals. Among them was inmate 41783, Damian Cole. At 39 years old, Damian remained remarkably composed despite serving life imprisonment, without parole for masterminding an armed robbery that had left 3 innocent people dead. Newspapers once labeled him a ruthless criminal genius whose carefully orchestrated crimes demonstrated unusual intelligence. Inside prison walls, however, Damian had cultivated an entirely different reputation. Correctional officers described him as respectful. Psychologists called him exceptionally persuasive. Other inmates simply avoided crossing him. He rarely raised his voice. He rarely displayed anger. Instead, he listened carefully, observed constantly, and understood people with unsettling accuracy. His greatest weapon had never been violence. It was influence. On that particular afternoon, Damien sat alone inside the prison library, reading a worn philosophy book, while another inmate grew increasingly frustrated over a failed legal appeal. "They're never letting us out," the inmate muttered bitterly. Damien closed his book. "People make decisions emotionally. What does that have to do with anything? They believe they're rational." The inmate frowned. "But everyone has loneliness, fear, regret." Damien smiled faintly. "Understand those, and eventually they'll give you exactly what you want." The inmate laughed dismissively. "You sound more like a professor than a murderer." "I've always preferred conversation." A correctional officer approached. "Cole." Damien stood calmly. "You've got mail." His expression never changed, but his eyes brightened almost imperceptibly. Back inside his cell, he carefully opened the envelope. Inside rested only a single handwritten page. He recognized the elegant handwriting instantly. Every letter was perfectly formed. Every sentence deliberate. Every word unmistakably Evelyn's. She wrote about exhausting court schedules, endless public expectations, and the loneliness that surrounded success. She admitted she often felt invisible despite standing before crowded courtrooms every day. There were no declarations of love. No reckless promises. Only quiet confessions shared between two people who believed nobody else truly understood them. Damien reread the letter twice before placing it inside a carefully organized collection hidden beneath loose floorboards. There were dozens more. Some dated back nearly 8 years. Their relationship had begun with official interviews during post-conviction proceedings. Evelyn had admired Damien's intellect despite condemning his crimes. Damien had admired her certainty while quietly recognizing the emotional emptiness beneath her disciplined exterior. Professional conversations gradually became personal. Personal conversations evolved into private correspondence. Private correspondence became emotional dependence. Neither acknowledged the exact moment boundaries disappeared. By the time either recognized what had happened, secrecy had become essential. For Evelyn, Damien represented someone who listened without judging her ambition or demanding more than she could give. For Damien, Evelyn represented freedom, not from prison walls but from isolation itself. Their connection existed almost entirely through carefully hidden letters, encrypted phone arrangements, and occasional visits disguised as legal reviews. Both understood the consequences if anyone discovered the truth. A respected judge involved romantically with a convicted murderer would destroy careers, families, and public confidence in the justice system. Yet neither ended the relationship. Instead, they buried it deeper each passing year. That same evening, Evelyn sat alone in her locked study, reading Damien's newest reply beneath the warm glow of a desk lamp. Outside, the house remained silent, unaware that another secret letter had crossed the invisible bridge between prison walls and a judge's private life. Upstairs, Claire paused outside the closed office door after hearing the faint rustle of paper and the quiet click of a drawer locking once again. She didn't know what Evelyn was hiding, but for the first time, she became certain there was something worth uncovering. Claire barely slept after overhearing the familiar sound of Evelyn locking away another letter. Every unanswered question seemed to multiply during the quiet hours of the night. She reminded herself repeatedly that suspicion alone meant nothing. People deserved privacy, especially someone entrusted with the responsibilities of a senior judge. Still, the unexplained phone calls, mysterious envelopes, and inconsistent schedules formed a pattern that refused to disappear. She decided she would not accuse anyone without facts. If there was an innocent explanation, she wanted to find it. If there was something darker, she needed to understand it before drawing conclusions. The following Monday, Claire began volunteering at the courthouse archives, helping digitize decades of public legal records for a historical preservation project. The assignment gave her limited access to administrative files, courtroom calendars, and scheduling databases. Most of the work involved scanning old case documents, but occasionally she assisted clerks with organizing judicial travel logs and security authorizations. Everything appeared routine until late one afternoon. A courthouse administrator approached carrying several folders. "Could you file these transportation records before you leave?" "Of course." Claire accepted the stack and carried it to an empty records office. As she sorted through the paperwork, one file caught her attention purely by coincidence. Judge Evelyn Harper. Claire hesitated only briefly before opening it. She expected routine courthouse scheduling documents. Instead, she found official visitor authorization forms for Blackwood State Penitentiary. Her eyes narrowed. Several entries listed Evelyn as conducting administrative legal reviews concerning inmate appeals. That alone was not unusual. Judges occasionally visited correctional facilities. What troubled Claire were the accompanying approval codes. The forms referenced emergency judicial inspections that never appeared anywhere else within the courthouse calendar. Curious, she searched the digital scheduling system. Nothing. No official hearings. No prison review committees. No appellate conferences. The prison visits existed only within transportation records. Every other administrative document was missing. Perhaps they had been archived separately. Perhaps she simply lacked clearance. Yet something felt unmistakably wrong. Before leaving for the evening, Claire quietly asked one of the senior clerks a seemingly innocent question. "Do judges often conduct prison inspections alone?" The woman looked puzzled. "Almost never." "What about emergency administrative reviews?" "They're usually handled by appellate panels or corrections officials." "So individual judges don't normally visit inmates privately?" The clerk shook her head. "Not unless a very unusual court order requires it." Claire thanked her and ended the conversation before attracting unnecessary attention. Her curiosity had transformed into concern. That evening she reviewed everything she remembered. Every mysterious phone call. Every envelope. Every unexplained absence. Now there were hidden prison visits. None of it proved wrongdoing. But none of it made sense. 2 days later, while preparing breakfast, Claire overheard Evelyn speaking with someone in the hallway. "Yes," Evelyn said quietly. "Tomorrow afternoon." A brief pause followed. "I'll handle the paperwork myself." She ended the call almost immediately. Later that morning, Claire noticed Evelyn place a familiar cream-colored envelope inside her leather briefcase before leaving for the courthouse. Something told Claire another prison visit was about to happen. The next afternoon she borrowed her father's car instead of driving her own, careful not to attract attention. Maintaining several vehicles had always seemed unnecessary to Daniel, but that day his aging sedan became unexpectedly useful. From a discreet distance, Claire watched Evelyn leave the courthouse. Rather than heading toward home, Evelyn turned onto Highway 8. Claire followed several cars behind, careful never to remain directly in Evelyn's mirrors. The farther they drove, the more isolated the roads became. Eventually, enormous concrete walls appeared beyond rows of security fencing. Blackwood State Penitentiary. Claire's heartbeat quickened. She watched Evelyn stop at the security gate and present official credentials. After several minutes, the gates slowly opened. Claire could not enter through the main checkpoint without authorization. Instead, she parked across the highway near a visitor information center overlooking one side of the prison complex. Public visitation areas occupied a separate building connected by enclosed corridors to the main institution. Families regularly entered after passing security screening. Claire purchased a temporary visitor pass under the pretense of seeking information about volunteer literacy programs offered inside correctional facilities. The receptionist directed her toward an observation corridor overlooking several visitation rooms separated by reinforced glass. She thanked the woman and walked slowly down the hallway. Most rooms contained ordinary family visits. Parents spoke with sons. Children waved excitedly through thick security partitions. Spouses smiled despite impossible circumstances. Claire almost convinced herself she had misunderstood everything. Then she saw Evelyn. Judge Harper sat alone inside one visitation booth. Across the glass sat a man wearing a dark prison uniform. Even from a distance, his posture radiated confidence rather than defeat. He smiled warmly the moment Evelyn entered. Claire recognized him immediately from newspaper photographs she had seen years earlier while studying criminal justice. Damian Cole, the convicted architect of the infamous Riverside armored truck robbery. The man responsible for planning a crime that left 3 innocent victims dead. Claire instinctively stepped behind a support column before cautiously looking again. She expected legal paperwork, case files, official discussion. Instead, Evelyn reached across the narrow opening beneath the protective barrier, where visitors briefly exchanged personal items under officer supervision. Damian gently placed both hands over hers. Neither spoke for several long moments. Their silence carried remarkable intimacy. Finally, Damian smiled. "I've missed you." Claire could not hear every word through the thick observation glass, but fragments drifted faintly whenever nearby doors opened. "You look exhausted," Damian said softly. "I'm managing. They're pushing you too hard." Evelyn lowered her eyes. "They expect perfection. You've always given them more than they deserved." His voice remained calm, almost comforting. Claire stared in disbelief. This was not a judge interviewing an inmate. This was something profoundly personal. Evelyn laughed quietly at something Damian whispered. It was a laugh Claire had never heard inside their home. Natural, relaxed, almost youthful. Damian leaned forward. "I worried after your last letter. I'm careful. You don't have to carry everything alone." Evelyn's expression softened. "For a little while, I don't feel alone here." The words struck Claire harder than anything she had witnessed so far. Years of emotional distance at home suddenly seemed connected to this impossible relationship hidden inside prison walls. She continued watching, frozen where she stood. Damian squeezed Evelyn's hands gently. "I still keep every letter. I know. I read them whenever the nights become unbearable. So do I." Neither noticed the surveillance cameras recording every movement. Neither noticed correctional officers walking nearby. Their attention belonged entirely to each other. Then, after another quiet exchange impossible to hear, Evelyn glanced briefly toward the hallway before leaning closer. Damian mirrored the movement. For one suspended moment, their foreheads nearly touched across the narrow opening. Then Evelyn reached forward. She kissed him. It lasted only a second. Brief, careful, undeniably intimate. Claire felt the air leave her lungs. She stumbled backward, nearly losing her balance. Her mind refused to process what her eyes had witnessed. Judge Evelyn Harper, the woman celebrated across the state as a symbol of justice. The woman who sentenced dangerous criminals without hesitation. The woman living under the same roof as Claire. She had just kissed one of the state's most notorious convicted murderers. Nothing about it resembled manipulation or coercion. It looked like genuine affection. Claire turned away before either of them could notice her. Every step toward the exit felt heavier than the last. Outside, the afternoon sun seemed strangely harsh. She sat inside her father's car, gripping the steering wheel with trembling hands. Questions flooded her mind faster than she could answer them. How long had this been happening? Did Daniel know? Had Evelyn abused her judicial authority? Was Damian manipulating her? Or had the relationship become something even more dangerous than manipulation? By the time Claire reached home, she had made only one decision. She would tell no one until she understood the full truth. But deep inside, she already sensed that the secret she had uncovered reached far beyond a forbidden romance. Somewhere beneath years of hidden letters, false prison authorizations, and stolen moments behind reinforced glass lay a far darker story. One she was now determined to uncover, no matter where it led. Claire drove home with trembling hands, replaying the prison visitation over and over in her mind. Every attempt to explain what she had witnessed collapsed beneath the weight of reality. She had not misunderstood the moment. She had not mistaken Damian Cole for someone else. Judge Evelyn Harper had willingly held the inmate's hands, spoken to him with unmistakable affection, and kissed him before leaving the prison. The discovery was too enormous to share without proof. If Claire accused one of the state's most respected judges based solely on what she had seen, few people would believe her. Evelyn's reputation was nearly untouchable. While Claire possessed nothing except her own testimony, she needed evidence. Not gossip, not assumptions, facts. That night, Claire lay awake staring at the ceiling while the rest of the house remained silent. Every creak of the old hardwood floors made her wonder whether Evelyn was awake as well. Every passing car outside seemed louder than usual. She reached a decision shortly before sunrise. Whatever secret connected Evelyn and Damien had been carefully protected for years. If she wanted answers, she would have to uncover them quietly. The following week became a careful balancing act. Claire behaved exactly as she always had around Evelyn, laughing politely during dinner, helping Daniel around the house, and asking ordinary questions about daily life. She gave no indication that she had followed Evelyn to Blackwood State Penitentiary or witnessed the forbidden meeting. Meanwhile, her investigation began. She started with public information. Using courthouse archives and online judicial databases, Claire reviewed every criminal proceeding connected to Damien Cole since his conviction. She expected to find routine appeals and rejected motions. Instead, she noticed something unusual. Although Damien remained imprisoned under a life sentence without parole, his institutional records reflected an uncommon number of approved educational transfers, expanded library access, private legal consultations, and administrative privileges unavailable to most inmates with violent histories. Individually, each approval appeared legitimate. Together, they formed an impossible pattern. Someone had repeatedly supported requests benefiting Damien. Claire examined the judicial signatures attached to several recommendations. Most belonged to correctional administrators. Yet certain authorization references pointed toward confidential judicial reviews involving Evelyn Harper. The language remained carefully vague. No document explicitly proved misconduct. Still, the approvals consistently favored Damien. Coincidence seemed increasingly unlikely. Claire quietly copied the document numbers into a notebook before returning every file exactly where she had found it. She refused to remove anything from courthouse property. The investigation demanded patience. Several days later, another opportunity presented itself unexpectedly. Daniel invited Claire to help organize old financial records stored inside the home's basement filing cabinets. "We've been meaning to clear this place out for years," he said with a tired smile. Boxes filled with insurance documents, tax returns, mortgage paperwork, and faded family photographs covered nearly every shelf. While sorting through one cabinet, Claire noticed a locked metal file box labeled Simply Legal. "Do you know what's inside?" Daniel shrugged. "Probably Evelyn's old paperwork." "The key?" "No idea." He continued unpacking another box without concern. Claire said nothing more. Later that afternoon, after Daniel left to buy groceries, she examined the cabinet more closely. The lock was inexpensive. Within minutes, using a small toolkit left behind from graduate school, she managed to open it without causing visible damage. Inside rested several neatly organized folders. Most contained ordinary court correspondence. One envelope immediately caught her attention. No return address. Cream-colored paper. Exactly like the envelopes Evelyn always collected before anyone else could touch them. Claire carefully unfolded the letter. At first glance, the writing seemed strangely poetic. "Winter remains patient while the river remembers." She frowned. The sentence meant nothing. Several more followed. "The gardener still waters the third tree. Our books remain unopened until autumn." The entire page resembled meaningless reflections rather than ordinary conversation. Then Claire noticed certain words underlined almost imperceptibly. "Winter, third, books, autumn." She copied the letter before replacing everything exactly as she had found it. Something told her the message had never been intended for ordinary reading. Over the next several weeks, Claire quietly photographed additional letters whenever opportunities arose. Every one contained similarly strange language. Gardens, birds, storms, clocks, paintings. None made obvious sense. Yet each included faint markings beneath carefully selected words. Eventually she recognized the pattern. The underlined words formed completely different messages when read independently. Meet Tuesday. Library entrance. Phone destroyed. Transfer complete. Wait quietly. The realization sent chills through her body. Someone had designed an entire system of coded correspondence. These were not love letters alone. They concealed instructions. Claire began wondering what else they might be hiding. Her search gradually expanded beyond the house. One afternoon, she visited publicly accessible campaign finance databases while researching judicial ethics for the nonprofit where she volunteered. An unrelated search unexpectedly revealed several charitable donations made through small legal consulting companies connected to retired attorneys. Nothing appeared suspicious until Claire compared the corporate registrations. 3 companies shared identical mailing addresses. All were inactive. Each had transferred funds into prison educational foundations supporting inmate rehabilitation. On paper, everything looked lawful. But the foundations repeatedly purchased legal research materials used almost exclusively inside Blackwood State Penitentiary. The amounts were modest enough to avoid attracting attention. $5,000, $8,000, $12,000, spread over several years. Individually insignificant, collectively substantial. Claire traced one consulting company further. Its registered accountant had once worked for Evelyn's former law firm. Another coincidence. Too many coincidences. She documented every transaction carefully. Days later, another breakthrough arrived. While leaving the courthouse parking garage, Claire noticed Evelyn accidentally drop a folded receipt while unlocking her car. After waiting until Evelyn drove away, Claire retrieved it. The receipt came from a convenience store nearly 40 miles outside the city. Purchased items included bottled water, batteries, prepaid mobile minutes, and a basic prepaid cellular phone. Burner phones. The receipt was dated only 3 days earlier. Claire photographed it before slipping it back beneath the windshield where Evelyn might assume it had fallen unnoticed. Later that evening, Claire searched trash bins stored behind the garage before collection day. Inside one sealed shopping bag, she discovered empty prepaid phone packaging matching the receipt. The activation card had been removed. Nothing else remained. Someone had deliberately destroyed every identifying record. The deeper Claire investigated, the clearer the hidden picture became. Secret prison visits, coded letters, financial pathways, disposable phones, administrative favors. Each discovery strengthened the previous one. Yet one question remained unanswered. Why? What purpose justified maintaining such extraordinary secrecy for nearly 8 years? The answer continued hiding just beyond her reach. Unfortunately, Claire was no longer the only person noticing unusual activity. Inside her courthouse office, Evelyn unlocked a secure document cabinet while preparing paperwork for an upcoming hearing. One folder sat slightly differently than she remembered. Only a fraction of an inch. Almost invisible. Someone unfamiliar with her obsessive organization would never have noticed. She froze. Slowly, she examined several other files. A transportation log rested beneath the wrong divider. One paperclip faced the opposite direction. Another envelope had been folded along a different crease. Nothing was missing. Nothing obvious had changed. Yet someone had opened them. Her pulse quickened. Years of carefully maintained control vanished beneath a single terrifying realization. Someone had accessed records nobody should have known existed. That evening, she returned home unusually quiet. During dinner, she watched Claire more closely than ever before. "How was your day?" Evelyn asked casually. "Pretty normal. Still volunteering at the archives?" "Most afternoons." Evelyn smiled politely. "I imagine you've seen quite a few interesting records." Claire met her eyes without hesitation. "Mostly boring paperwork." For a brief second, neither woman looked away. Daniel noticed nothing. He continued discussing neighborhood renovations while the uncomfortable silence lingered beneath ordinary conversation. After dinner, Evelyn retreated to her study. Instead of reading Damien's newest letter, she opened a locked drawer containing every confidential record connected to their relationship. One by one, she examined each document. Nothing appeared stolen. Nothing obvious had disappeared. Still, instinct screamed that someone had come dangerously close to discovering everything. For the first time in years, Judge Evelyn Harper no longer felt protected by careful planning. Confidence gave way to something unfamiliar. Fear. Real, persistent fear. And across the hallway, Claire quietly organized her growing collection of notes, unaware that the woman she was investigating had finally begun realizing she was no longer alone in guarding the truth. Claire spent the next 2 days reviewing every note, photograph, and document she had collected. She spread them across her bedroom floor in careful order, tracing connections with colored markers and handwritten timelines. Prison visitation logs rested beside photographs of coded letters. Financial records sat next to receipts for prepaid phones. Every discovery pointed toward the same conclusion. Judge Evelyn Harper had spent years building a hidden life that depended entirely upon secrecy. Yet despite everything Claire had uncovered, one question continued haunting her. Why had Evelyn risked everything? She had a respected career, financial security, public admiration, and a family waiting at home. None of it explained why she would secretly devote years of her life to Damien Cole, a convicted murderer serving life without parole. Claire realized she could continue collecting evidence forever without understanding the truth behind it. Only one person could answer that question. Late Friday evening, Daniel received an emergency phone call from his older brother, whose wife had suffered a minor heart attack in a neighboring town. Although doctors expected a full recovery, Daniel immediately packed an overnight bag. "I'll probably stay until tomorrow afternoon," he told Claire. She hugged him gently. "Drive safely." Daniel kissed Evelyn on the forehead before leaving. "Try to get some rest." "You too." The front door closed. The sound of his car disappeared down the quiet street. Silence settled over the house. Claire looked toward Evelyn, who stood in the kitchen rinsing a coffee mug. "We need to talk." Evelyn continued washing the cup. "About what?" "Not here." The older woman slowly turned off the faucet and dried her hands with a towel. Something in Claire's voice felt different. Not angry, not frightened, certain. Without speaking, Evelyn followed Claire into the living room. Rain tapped softly against the large front windows while distant thunder rolled across the dark sky. Only a single lamp illuminated the room, casting long shadows over family photographs displayed along the fireplace. Claire remained standing. Evelyn sat calmly on the sofa. "What is this about?" she asked. Claire took a slow breath. "I know about Blackwood." The room became perfectly still. Evelyn's expression did not change. "I don't know what you mean." "I followed you." "Nothing. I saw you with Damien Cole." The words hung heavily between them. For several seconds, neither woman spoke. Then Evelyn smiled faintly. "I think you've misunderstood something." "No." Claire reached into her bag and removed several photographs she had printed earlier that afternoon. She placed them carefully on the coffee table. One showed Evelyn entering the prison visitation building. Another captured Damien through reinforced glass. A third showed their hands resting together beneath the partition. Evelyn stared at the photographs. The color slowly drained from her face. "You followed me. I didn't want to believe what I was seeing. You invaded my privacy. I uncovered the truth." For the first time since Claire had known her, Judge Evelyn Harper appeared unable to control her emotions. She stood abruptly. "You had absolutely no right." "I had every right after everything you've hidden." "You know nothing." "I know enough." Evelyn began pacing slowly across the room, her breathing growing heavier with each step. Claire remained calm despite the tension building between them. "This isn't just an affair." "No? I found the prison authorizations." Evelyn stopped walking. "I found the coded letters." Silence. "I traced the financial transfers." Another silence. "I found evidence suggesting you've influenced Damien's prison privileges for years." Evelyn closed her eyes. When she finally spoke, her voice sounded exhausted rather than defensive. "How much do you actually know?" "I know you've broken the law." "No. You abused your office." "You don't understand." "Then explain it." For several long moments, Evelyn simply looked at the rain beyond the windows. When she finally turned back toward Claire, the confidence that had defined her courtroom presence had disappeared completely. "I never intended for any of this to happen." Claire waited quietly. It began with interviews. After his conviction, yes, he appealed several procedural issues. I was assigned to review portions of the record. You fell in love with him? Evelyn laughed bitterly. It wasn't that simple. Then tell me. The older woman lowered herself slowly into an armchair. I spent my entire adult life proving myself. Claire listened without interruption. I worked harder than everyone around me. I sacrificed friendships. I sacrificed weekends. I sacrificed motherhood. Her voice trembled. I sacrificed almost every part of myself because people expected perfection. You had Dad. I had a husband who eventually stopped seeing me. Claire frowned. He loves you. He loved who I used to be. The words came quietly. We stopped talking years ago. We shared a house. We stopped sharing our lives. Claire remained silent. I couldn't admit how lonely I had become. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears she refused to wipe away. Then I met Damien. He's a murderer. I know exactly what he is. Then why? Because he listened. Claire stared at her in disbelief. He asked me how I felt. No one else did. He remembered conversations. He noticed when I looked exhausted. He saw the woman beneath the robe. Claire shook her head. That's manipulation. Maybe. Or maybe it was the first time in years someone made me feel visible. He used you. You think I haven't asked myself that? Evelyn stood again. Every single day. But every time I walked away from those prison walls, I felt less alone than when I walked through my own front door. Claire's voice softened. That doesn't excuse what you've done. I know. You crossed every ethical boundary imaginable. I know. You lied to Dad. I know. You corrupted the justice system. I know. Each admission sounded more painful than the last. Claire slowly stepped closer. This can still end. Evelyn looked at her without speaking. You need to confess. The older woman remained silent. Tell the Judicial Ethics Commission. Resign. Cooperate. Tell investigators everything before someone else does. You might save what's left of your life. Evelyn smiled sadly. You really believe that? I do. They'll destroy me. You made these choices. They'll destroy your father. Claire swallowed hard. They'll destroy every case I've ever touched. People deserve the truth. They'll question every verdict. Then let them. My career. My reputation. My legacy. Claire interrupted gently. Those things are already gone. Another long silence filled the room. Outside, rain struck the windows harder than before. Finally, Claire reached into her bag once more. She removed a thick folder containing copies of every document she had collected. I haven't shown this to anyone. Evelyn stared at it. Not yet. I wanted to hear your side first. You still have a chance. Do the right thing. Evelyn looked at the folder as though it were a death sentence. Years of carefully hidden lies rested inside. Years of deception. Years of forbidden love. If those papers reached investigators, everything would collapse. Her career, her marriage, her freedom. Every secret she had protected so carefully would become public record. She slowly lifted her eyes toward Claire. Instead of seeing compassion, she saw only danger. Not because Claire intended harm, but because Claire possessed the power to end everything. In that terrible moment, Evelyn stopped seeing her stepdaughter as family. She saw only a witness carrying enough evidence to destroy the carefully constructed life she had spent decades building. As Claire quietly gathered the folder and turned toward the hallway, believing the conversation had planted the first seed of confession, Evelyn remained standing in the living room, staring into the darkness with a mind consumed by one horrifying certainty. If Claire chose to expose the truth, there would be no future left to save. The house remained unnaturally quiet after Claire walked upstairs carrying the folder of evidence. Evelyn stayed in the living room long after the rain had stopped, staring at the empty doorway where her stepdaughter had disappeared. Every word of their conversation echoed relentlessly through her mind. Claire had not threatened her. She had pleaded with her. Yet the result felt exactly the same. Everything Evelyn had built stood on the edge of collapse. Sleep never came that night. Instead, she sat alone in her study, opening the locked drawer that contained years of carefully hidden correspondence with Damien. She reread old letters, examined photographs, and held one faded envelope in trembling hands. Her phone vibrated just after 2 in the morning. A secure prepaid number. She answered quietly. "I couldn't sleep," Damien said. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. Finally, Evelyn whispered, "Someone knows." His voice remained calm. "How much?" "Everything." A pause. "Can they prove it?" "They've gathered documents." "Who?" She closed her eyes. "Claire." Another silence followed. "What are you going to do?" Damien asked. "I don't know. You've always known how to survive. I've never faced anything like this." Damien's tone softened. "If she goes to investigators, they'll dismantle your entire career." "I know. They'll reopen every case connected to you." "I know. They'll separate us forever." The final sentence lingered long after the call ended. Evelyn placed the phone on her desk and buried her face in her hands. For years she had believed discipline could solve every problem. Every courtroom crisis had yielded to logic, preparation, and patience. This situation offered no easy solution. The following morning Daniel returned home relieved that his sister-in-law was recovering well. The ordinary rhythm of family life resumed almost immediately. He spoke cheerfully over breakfast, completely unaware that the emotional foundation of his household had begun collapsing. Claire remained polite but distant. Evelyn appeared composed, though dark circles beneath her eyes revealed another sleepless night. Throughout the day, Evelyn watched Claire carefully. She noticed Claire carrying the evidence folder whenever she left her bedroom. She noticed several lengthy computer sessions. She noticed encrypted cloud storage windows reflected briefly across Claire's laptop screen before they disappeared. Whether Claire had actually created backups or not, Evelyn could no longer distinguish certainty from fear. By late afternoon, Daniel mentioned unexpected news. "I have another hospital visit tonight." Claire looked up. "Everything okay?" "My brother asked if I could stay a few more hours." He smiled apologetically. "I'll probably miss dinner again." "No problem," Claire replied. After he left, silence settled over the house once more. Evelyn stood alone in the kitchen for several minutes before opening the refrigerator. She removed fresh vegetables, herbs, pasta, and a bottle of wine. She began preparing Claire's favorite meal from years earlier, one they had shared after Claire graduated from college. The familiar routine steadied her shaking hands. She set the dining table with polished silverware, folded linen napkins, and the good china reserved for holidays. Candles flickered softly as evening darkness filled the windows. Everything appeared peaceful. Everything appeared normal. Claire entered the dining room shortly after 7. "This looks nice." Evelyn offered a tired smile. "I thought we both deserved a quieter evening." Claire hesitated before taking her seat. "I appreciate that." Dinner began awkwardly. For several minutes they discussed ordinary subjects. Daniel's family, Claire's volunteer work, an upcoming community fundraiser. Neither mentioned the previous night's confrontation. Gradually, the tension eased. At one point, Claire even laughed quietly after recalling an embarrassing childhood story. For a fleeting moment, the room resembled the family Evelyn had once imagined they might become. "I've been thinking," Evelyn said softly. Claire looked up. "About what?" "Everything you said." Claire waited. "You were right about one thing." "What?" "I spent too many years hiding." Hope briefly crossed Claire's face. "You can still change that." "I know." The conversation paused while they finished dinner. After clearing the plates, Claire carried 2 coffee mugs into the living room. Evelyn followed with dessert. Rain clouds had returned, and distant thunder rolled beyond the windows. Claire placed her mug on the coffee table. "I've been hoping you'd say something like this. I've had time to think." "So have I." Evelyn sat opposite her. "What happens now?" she asked. Claire folded her hands together. "I wanted you to tell the truth yourself. And if I don't?" Claire looked down briefly before meeting Evelyn's eyes. "I made copies." Evelyn's heartbeat quickened. "Copies?" "Every document. The letters. The financial records. The prison authorizations. I scanned everything." She spoke calmly, without anger. "I stored them in more than one place." Evelyn remained perfectly still. "I was hoping I wouldn't need them. When will you decide?" Claire inhaled slowly. I already have. Silence filled the room. I'm contacting federal investigators tomorrow morning. The words landed with crushing finality. I've drafted the report. I'll deliver everything. Evelyn. I didn't want it to end this way. For several seconds, neither woman moved. The ticking grandfather clock in the hallway suddenly sounded impossibly loud. Evelyn stared at the family photographs above the fireplace. Years of achievement. Years of carefully maintained respect. Years of sacrifice. She imagined headlines, televised hearings, courtroom cameras, and public disgrace. She imagined Daniel learning the truth. She imagined Damien disappearing forever behind even stricter prison restrictions. Everything she feared seemed only hours away. Claire stood slowly. I'm going upstairs. Evelyn, I truly wish you had chosen differently. She turned toward the staircase. Evelyn remained seated. Her breathing became shallow. A deafening rush of panic drowned every rational thought. She rose quietly. Claire reached the bottom step. Without speaking, Evelyn picked up a heavy brass fireplace ornament resting beside the hearth. She took several silent steps forward. Then she swung it. The object struck Claire across the back of the head. Claire cried out and stumbled against the staircase railing instead of collapsing. She turned in disbelief. Evelyn. Blood trickled through her hair. Shock filled her expression. You! Claire instinctively tried to move away. Evelyn dropped the ornament. For one suspended instant, both women simply stared at each other. Then Claire lunged toward the hallway. Evelyn caught her arm. They struggled desperately, crashing into a side table that shattered across the hardwood floor. Claire fought to break free. She pushed Evelyn backward and reached for her phone. Evelyn grabbed her wrist. The device skidded beneath a cabinet. Stop! Claire cried. You don't have to do this. Panic overwhelmed every remaining fragment of judgment. The struggle continued through the living room, knocking over chairs and scattering broken glass across the floor. Claire attempted to reach the front door. Evelyn pulled her back. Both women fell heavily. Their desperate struggle ended moments later. When the house finally fell silent again, only Evelyn remained standing. Breathing hard, she stared at the terrible consequences of her own actions. Time seemed to stop. Then survival instinct returned. Mechanically, she wiped surfaces she remembered touching during the struggle. She forced open a rear window. Several drawers were emptied onto the floor to imitate a frantic search for valuables. A jewelry box was overturned. Cabinets were left open. The house gradually took on the appearance of a burglary interrupted by tragedy. When she finally stepped back to survey the room, the scene looked chaotic enough to mislead an initial glance. She washed her hands, changed her clothing, and placed the blood-stained garments inside sealed trash bags. Her movements were precise, almost automatic, reflecting years of disciplined self-control. Standing alone in the ruined living room, Evelyn convinced herself the nightmare had ended. Claire could no longer reveal the secret. The evidence, she believed, had died with her. Certain that she had erased the greatest threat to her carefully constructed life, Evelyn failed to notice one crucial detail left behind. Something investigators would soon discover that refused to fit the story of a simple burglary gone wrong. Dawn arrived with a cold gray light that revealed the full horror inside the Harper residence. Evelyn stood in the kitchen clutching a cup of untouched coffee, staring toward the living room where silence had replaced the violent struggle of the previous evening. She had rehearsed every word she intended to say when the emergency dispatcher answered. Her voice would sound frightened, confused, heartbroken. She would describe returning from another room to discover what appeared to be a burglary interrupted by unimaginable violence. She picked up her phone. Her fingers hesitated for only a moment. Then she dialed emergency services. Within minutes, flashing blue and red lights illuminated the quiet suburban street. Patrol officers secured the property while paramedics entered through the front door. Neighbors gathered behind police tape, whispering anxiously as reporters began arriving after hearing radio dispatches describing the homicide of a judge's stepdaughter. Daniel returned home shortly afterward. The moment he stepped from his car and saw the police vehicles, confusion gave way to panic. What happened? No one answered immediately. An officer gently stopped him before he reached the doorway. I'm sorry, sir. Daniel looked past the officer and saw paramedics wheeling a covered stretcher toward the ambulance. His knees nearly gave way. No. His voice broke. No. That's not. The officer lowered his head. Daniel collapsed onto the front lawn as grief overwhelmed him. Nearby, Evelyn sat wrapped in a blanket beside an ambulance, tears streaming down her face while victim advocates attempted to comfort her. To every observer, she appeared devastated. Only she knew the tears carried far more than sorrow. They carried terror. Less than an hour later, a dark sedan rolled beneath the yellow crime scene tape. Detective Marcus Bennett stepped out carrying a leather evidence case. Marcus possessed nearly 20 years of homicide experience and a reputation for noticing details others ignored. Calm, methodical, and relentlessly patient, he rarely accepted obvious explanations until every fact supported them. He surveyed the quiet neighborhood before approaching the house. A uniformed officer greeted him. "Morning, detective. What do we have?" "Possible burglary turned homicide." Marcus nodded but said nothing. He preferred letting crime scenes speak before witnesses did. Inside the Harper residence, forensic technicians photographed every room while evidence markers slowly multiplied across the hardwood floor. Marcus stood silently in the living room. Furniture lay overturned. Cabinet drawers had been emptied. Broken glass covered portions of the floor. At first glance, the scene resembled exactly what the responding officers believed. A burglary. Yet something immediately felt wrong. He crouched beside the broken coffee table. "Where's the point of entry?" The crime scene technician answered without looking up. "Rear kitchen window." Marcus walked toward the window. The latch hung loosely, and scattered dirt marked the windowsill. He examined the frame carefully. No splintering, no tool marks, no damaged lock. The technician nodded. "It appears someone opened it from the inside." Marcus looked outside. Fresh flower beds stretched beneath the window, almost completely undisturbed. No footprints? None. The detective remained silent. He returned to the living room. Claire's injuries drew his attention next. The medical examiner's preliminary observations suggested blunt force trauma followed by extensive physical struggle before death. Marcus studied blood patterns carefully. Something refused to align. If this started during a burglary, he murmured, "Why is the first blood impact here?" He pointed toward the staircase. One forensic analyst glanced up. The victim probably surprised the intruder. Marcus continued studying the evidence. Maybe. His tone suggested otherwise. He noticed additional blood smears leading away from the staircase before signs of struggle spread across the living room. It looked less like a sudden attack during theft and more like violence that escalated after an initial confrontation. He made another note. Hours later, Marcus interviewed Evelyn inside a quiet patrol vehicle parked away from reporters. She appeared emotionally exhausted. "I know this is difficult," Marcus said gently. "I need you to describe everything exactly as you remember." Evelyn lowered her eyes. "I was cleaning the kitchen. I heard something break. When I came into the living room," her voice cracked, "I found Claire." "You saw no one else?" "No." "Were any doors unlocked?" "I don't think so." "Did Claire mention expecting visitors?" "No." Marcus observed every pause, every hesitation, every carefully chosen word. She answered logically, perhaps too logically. Years inside courtrooms had clearly taught her how to remain composed under questioning. Marcus thanked her before moving on. His next interview proved far more emotional. Daniel sat inside a family friend's house across the street, barely able to speak. "My daughter." His hands trembled uncontrollably. Marcus waited patiently. "Did Claire ever mention problems with anyone?" Daniel slowly shook his head. "She loved helping people. She wasn't afraid of anyone." "What about inside the family?" Daniel frowned. "What do you mean? Any recent arguments?" He hesitated. "Nothing serious. Claire and Evelyn weren't especially close, but they were polite." Marcus wrote quietly. "No financial disputes?" "No." "No romantic relationships causing conflict?" Daniel shook his head again. I can't imagine anyone wanting to hurt Claire. The interview ended without obvious leads. Back inside the house, forensic specialists continued cataloging evidence. One young technician approached Marcus carrying an inventory clipboard. Something interesting. What? The victim's laptop is here. So is her phone. Credit cards. Wallet. Jewelry. Marcus looked up. What was stolen? The technician frowned. That's the problem. We're not sure. Most staged burglaries involved missing valuables. Here, expensive electronics remained untouched. Designer watches still rested inside bedroom drawers. Cash remained inside Daniel's office. Only random household items appeared disturbed, almost as though someone wanted investigators to believe theft had occurred without actually stealing anything. Marcus requested a complete inventory. Later that afternoon, while examining Claire's bedroom, another inconsistency surfaced. A laptop rested neatly upon the desk. Its cloud backup software remained active. Recent folders showed extensive research involving prison visitation records, judicial ethics, and financial documents. Many files referenced Judge Evelyn Harper. Marcus exchanged a glance with the digital forensic examiner. Interesting. The examiner nodded. Looks like she was investigating something. Marcus scrolled through recently accessed directories. Most contained notes, photographs, timeline documents. Yet one folder repeatedly referenced an external storage device. Flash drive _backup _final. He searched the room carefully. Desk drawers, bookshelves, closets. Nothing. Find the drive. The examiner looked puzzled. Maybe she carried it. Maybe. Marcus wasn't convinced. If Claire had spent weeks documenting sensitive information, why would the primary backup disappear while everything else remained? He questioned Daniel again. Did Claire own a flash drive? Daniel wiped his eyes. Several. She always backed everything up. Did you see one recently? I think she mentioned keeping important documents on one. Where? I don't know. Marcus thanked him. By evening, the missing storage device had become the investigation's most important unanswered question. Someone had removed it. Whether before or after Claire's death remained uncertain. Meanwhile, life beyond the crime scene continued with unsettling normality. 2 days later, Judge Evelyn Harper entered Courtroom 3, wearing the same black robe that had long symbolized unwavering authority. Attorneys rose as she took the bench. No one in the courtroom could fully comprehend how she managed to return so quickly after such devastating personal loss. Some admired her resilience. Others quietly questioned it. Evelyn maintained her usual calm voice while hearing motions and issuing rulings. Yet beneath the robe, panic steadily consumed her. Every time courtroom doors opened unexpectedly, she imagined federal agents entering with arrest warrants. Every whispered conversation among attorneys sounded like accusations. Every ringing telephone felt capable of ending her career. Sleep became nearly impossible. Nightmares returned whenever she closed her eyes. Claire's final words echoed endlessly. I made copies. Those 3 words refused to disappear. If copies existed, where were they? Had Claire trusted someone else? Had investigators already found them? Or was the missing flash drive still waiting somewhere beyond Evelyn's reach? Each possibility deepened her fear. She secretly searched Claire's bedroom after detectives released portions of the house, hoping to locate anything investigators had overlooked. Nothing. She checked storage boxes. Nothing. She examined old backpacks, drawers, and closets. Still nothing. The flash drive had vanished. For Detective Marcus Bennett, the missing device represented the key to understanding a suspicious homicide. For Evelyn Harper, it represented something far more dangerous. It represented the possibility that Claire's voice had survived her death, and that somewhere, hidden beyond anyone's sight, the truth was still waiting to be found. The missing flash drive dominated Detective Marcus Bennett's investigation for nearly 2 weeks. Every lead eventually circled back to the same unanswered question. Claire had clearly been gathering evidence against someone before her death, yet the most important piece of her research had vanished without explanation. Marcus refused to dismiss the possibility that the missing device contained the motive for the murder. His persistence gradually attracted attention beyond the local homicide division. Because the investigation involved a sitting state judge, allegations of judicial misconduct, and possible corruption inside a maximum security prison, federal authorities formally joined the case. Agents from the Public Corruption Task Force began reviewing years of sealed administrative records connected to Judge Evelyn Harper's official activities. The deeper they searched, the more troubling the paperwork became. Several judicial authorizations approving unusual prison accommodations lacked proper committee review. Certain emergency legal consultations appeared on prison records but nowhere within state court scheduling systems. Transportation logs contained authorization numbers assigned to unrelated judicial proceedings. One agent quietly summarized the growing problem. "Somebody has been rewriting the paper trail." Marcus nodded. "We just need to prove who." The task force obtained federal warrants allowing investigators to examine communication records associated with inmate Damian Cole. Although prison correspondence was routinely monitored, privileged legal communications often received limited review unless criminal misconduct was suspected. That protection disappeared the moment corruption became part of the investigation. Boxes containing archived letters, visitation logs, recorded telephone calls, electronic messaging records, and financial documentation arrived at the federal evidence facility. For 3 consecutive days, analysts worked almost without interruption. Patterns quickly emerged. The same prepaid phone numbers appeared repeatedly over several years. Several charitable organizations had quietly funded educational programs benefiting Damian's prison unit. Anonymous donations matched dates corresponding with Evelyn's private visits. None of the evidence independently proved an inappropriate relationship. Together, however, the connections became increasingly difficult to ignore. Federal prosecutors decided it was time to confront Damian directly. Blackwood State Penitentiary transferred him into a secure interview room monitored by multiple cameras. Special Agent Rebecca Lawson entered alongside Detective Marcus Bennett. Damian remained composed as always. He folded his hands neatly across the steel table. "What can I do for you?" Lawson placed several folders before him. "We're investigating judicial corruption." "I see. We're also investigating Claire Donovan's homicide." Damian's expression remained unchanged. "I heard about that. You knew Judge Evelyn Harper personally." "I knew many judges." Marcus quietly opened another folder. "We've reviewed your visitation records." Damian smiled faintly. "I'm entitled to legal meetings." "You received far more than legal meetings." "Did I?" Lawson slid several photographs across the table. Images captured Evelyn entering Blackwood repeatedly over the years. One surveillance photograph showed them sitting unusually close during a supposedly administrative consultation. Another documented unauthorized visitation extensions. Damian glanced at them briefly before looking away. "Interesting photographs." Marcus leaned forward. "Help us understand them." "I can't. Or won't." Damian shrugged. "There isn't much difference." The questioning continued for nearly 2 hours. Every answer remained carefully measured. He admitted corresponding with Evelyn. He described their relationship as professional. He denied receiving special treatment. He rejected every allegation suggesting corruption. Whenever investigators pressed harder, he calmly requested another question. Not once did he criticize Evelyn. Not once did he betray her. Eventually, the interview ended. Outside the room, Lawson sighed heavily. "He's protecting her." Marcus nodded. "For now." Meanwhile, Evelyn's situation deteriorated rapidly. News organizations had begun reporting anonymous allegations involving irregular prison authorizations connected to unnamed judicial officials. Although her name remained confidential, she recognized the investigation closing around her. Each morning she entered the courthouse wondering whether federal agents would be waiting inside. Each evening she returned home to overwhelming silence. Daniel barely spoke anymore. Grief had hollowed him. Claire's empty bedroom remained untouched. Family photographs now felt like accusations staring from every wall. Evelyn realized the life she had fought so desperately to preserve had already begun disappearing. One evening, she unlocked the hidden drawer containing Damien's letters. For several minutes, she simply stared at them. Then, one by one, she fed every page into the fireplace. Flames slowly consumed 8 years of carefully guarded correspondence. She watched until nothing remained except drifting gray ash. Next, she gathered photographs, burner phones, receipts. Every object connecting her to Damien disappeared into the fire. Finally, she picked up the prepaid phone reserved exclusively for him. Her thumb hovered over the keypad. She typed only one message. This must end forever. Do not contact me again. She pressed send. Seconds later, the reply arrived. Please don't do this. Evelyn stared at the screen. Then she removed the battery, snapped the phone in half, and dropped both pieces into separate trash bags. For the first time since their relationship began, complete silence stood between them. Inside Blackwood State Penitentiary, Damien waited anxiously for another message that never came. Hours became days. Days became nearly a week. Nothing. He requested approved legal calls. None included Evelyn. He sent coded letters. No replies arrived. His prison counselor informed him that future visitation requests from Judge Harper had been permanently canceled. Something inside him shifted. At first he believed she was protecting both of them. Then another inmate slid a newspaper across the recreation table. Headline: Federal Corruption Probe Expands into Judge Investigation. Damien read every word carefully. Though Evelyn remained unnamed, he immediately recognized the circumstances. A second article published 2 days later described investigators examining years of prison communication records. Damien understood exactly what that meant. They had found the trail. He spent the following night alone inside his cell replaying years of conversations in his mind. Every promise, every confession, every reassurance. Evelyn had once whispered through reinforced prison glass, "No matter what happens, I will never leave you." Now she had vanished without explanation. Not even a goodbye, only silence. By morning, affection had begun transforming into something colder. Betrayal. When federal investigators requested a second interview, Damien accepted immediately. This time he looked different. Not frightened, not defeated, resolved. Lawson entered with Marcus once again. "I changed my mind," Damien said quietly before either investigator spoke. Marcus remained cautious. "About what?" "Everything." Lawson exchanged a brief glance with him. "We're listening." Damien folded his hands together. "You were right. Our relationship wasn't professional." He described their first interviews after sentencing. He explained how legal conversations gradually became personal letters. He admitted they exchanged coded correspondence specifically designed to avoid suspicion. Investigators listened silently while recording every word. Then Damien delivered the revelation neither officer expected. "I kept everything." Marcus looked up sharply. "Everything?" "Letters. Phone recordings. Copies." Lawson frowned. "Recorded phone calls?" Damien nodded. "I recorded every prepaid conversation." "Why?" He smiled sadly. "I never trusted forever." Federal technicians immediately obtained search warrants for Damien's authorized prison property. Hidden beneath loose flooring inside his cell, they discovered waterproof storage containers. Inside rested neatly organized evidence collected over nearly 8 years. Digital memory cards, handwritten letters, financial ledgers, burner phone contact lists, audio recordings. Every item carefully labeled by date. The recordings stunned investigators. Evelyn discussed confidential judicial matters. She explained methods used to arrange unauthorized visitation approvals. She described routing financial assistance through intermediary organizations. Most devastating of all were several emotional conversations following Claire's confrontation. In one recording, Evelyn confessed that Claire had discovered everything. Another captured her saying, "If she tells investigators, my life is over." Damien's voice answered calmly, "You've survived worse." No recording captured the murder itself. Yet together the conversations established motive with chilling clarity. The coded letters proved equally damaging. Investigators deciphered years of hidden messages using the underlined word system Claire had partially uncovered. Many discussed prison privileges. Others referenced financial transfers. Several mentioned destroying evidence. One letter ended with a haunting sentence. If anyone discovers us, neither of us survives. Marcus closed the final folder slowly. The investigation had changed completely. What began as a suspicious burglary now revealed judicial corruption, conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and overwhelming evidence establishing why Claire had become a target. When Marcus left the federal evidence room that evening, he carried a warrant package thick enough to end one of the state's most celebrated legal careers. Across town, Judge Evelyn Harper remained unaware that the man she had sacrificed everything to protect had finally chosen revenge instead of loyalty, and that the evidence he surrendered would soon place her where she had sentenced countless defendants before. Standing alone in a courtroom, awaiting judgment, the mourning Judge Evelyn Harper had feared for weeks finally arrived beneath a sky covered in heavy gray clouds. Television news vans lined the streets surrounding the federal courthouse before sunrise. Reporters rehearsed opening statements while camera operators adjusted equipment outside the security barriers. Every major network carried the proceedings live, describing the trial as one of the most significant public corruption cases in the state's history. Only months earlier, Evelyn had entered courthouses through private judicial entrances, greeted with admiration and professional respect. Now she arrived wearing handcuffs. Federal marshals escorted her through a side entrance surrounded by armed officers. Camera flashes exploded the moment she stepped from the transport vehicle. Questions echoed across the courthouse steps. Judge Harper, did you murder your stepdaughter? Do you regret your relationship with Damian Cole? Did you abuse your judicial office? She answered none of them. Inside the courtroom, spectators filled every available seat. Former colleagues occupied one section, many unable to hide their disbelief. Law students, journalists, retired judges, and members of the public waited silently as deputies prepared the room. Daniel entered quietly and sat alone near the back. His face appeared older than it had only months earlier. Grief had permanently settled into his expression. He never looked toward Evelyn. Precisely 9 o'clock, the courtroom deputy announced the judge's arrival. All rise. Ironically, another judge now occupied the same elevated bench where Evelyn had spent years delivering justice to others. She stood slowly beside her defense attorneys as the indictment was read aloud. Count 1, judicial corruption. Count 2, abuse of official authority. Count 3, obstruction of justice. Count 4, conspiracy. Count 5, first-degree murder. Evelyn answered softly, not guilty. The words sounded almost unfamiliar. Opening statements began immediately. Lead prosecutor Amanda Pierce walked deliberately before the jury. This case is not about a single mistake. It is about years of calculated deception. She paused. The defendant secretly manipulated prison procedures to maintain an inappropriate relationship with convicted murderer Damian Cole. When her stepdaughter uncovered that secret, the defendant made a choice. She chose self-preservation over human life. The courtroom remained perfectly silent. Defense attorney Michael Graves responded carefully. Judge Harper admits exercising poor judgment. She acknowledges an inappropriate emotional relationship. But poor judgment is not murder. The government will ask you to connect assumptions rather than facts. He urged the jury to examine every piece of evidence objectively. Then testimony began. Detective Marcus Bennett became one of the prosecution's earliest witnesses. He calmly described the crime scene investigation from beginning to end. Using enlarged photographs, he explained the absence of forced entry. He demonstrated how blood evidence contradicted the theory of a burglary interrupted by chance. He described Claire's injuries as consistent with an initial attack from behind before a prolonged struggle. The prosecutor asked, "Did the crime scene appear staged?" Marcus answered without hesitation, "Yes." "What led you to that conclusion?" The physical evidence didn't match the defendant's account. He carefully outlined each inconsistency. Broken furniture lacked corresponding impact patterns. Valuable property remained untouched. The rear window had been opened from inside the residence. Nothing suggested an unknown intruder had entered or escaped. Jurors listened attentively while taking notes. Next came digital forensic specialists. Large monitors displayed Claire's recovered cloud storage. Although the original flash drive remained missing, investigators had eventually located encrypted online backups automatically synchronized from her laptop only hours before her death. Folder after folder appeared before the jury. Photographs, judicial authorization records, financial timelines, scanned coded letters, copies of transportation logs, Claire's own handwritten observations. One final document carried a heartbreaking title. If something happens to me. The courtroom grew completely silent as prosecutors displayed Claire's final notes. She described fearing that confronting Evelyn might become dangerous despite desperately hoping confession would prevent tragedy. Daniel quietly lowered his head. Several jurors wiped away tears. Federal financial investigators followed. Charts illustrated years of concealed monetary transfers routed through charitable organizations before ultimately benefiting Damien's prison privileges. Witnesses explained how seemingly unrelated transactions formed coordinated payment pathways. Former prison administrators admitted approving unusual requests after receiving recommendations they believed originated through legitimate judicial authority. Each witness strengthened the same conclusion. The corruption had not been accidental. It had been systematic. Then prosecutors called the witness everyone anticipated. Damien Cole. He entered wearing prison restraints surrounded by correctional officers. His appearance immediately transformed the atmosphere inside the courtroom. Evelyn watched him closely. For several long seconds, neither spoke. Damien finally looked toward the jury. I loved her. His voice carried unexpected sadness. I also helped destroy her. Defense attorneys immediately challenged his credibility. You're a convicted murderer. Yes. You lied for years. Yes. You benefited from this relationship. I did. So why should anyone believe you now? Damien looked directly at Evelyn before answering. Because lies have already taken enough lives. The prosecutor began carefully guiding him through years of hidden correspondence. Damien explained the coded language. He identified letters. He authenticated recorded conversations. He admitted participating willingly in the deception. Then prosecutors played selected audio recordings. Evelyn's own voice filled the courtroom. I arranged another authorization. I'll make sure nobody questions the paperwork. Another recording followed. Claire knows. If she tells investigators, everything ends. Jurors watched Evelyn closely. She closed her eyes. Several recordings later, Damien described their final communication. I never heard from her again. I realized she had abandoned me. The defense objected repeatedly. Most objections were overruled. After weeks of testimony, prosecutors rested. The defense called Evelyn herself. She walked slowly toward the witness stand. Every eye followed her. After taking the oath, she remained silent until her attorney asked the first question. Did you love Damien Cole? She hesitated. Yes. Did you abuse your office? I made terrible decisions. Did you murder Claire Donovan? No. The prosecutor approached during cross-examination. You expect this jury to believe every witness is mistaken? No. You expect them to ignore your recorded admissions? They've been taken out of context. What context justifies manipulating prison records? Evelyn struggled to answer. What context explains financial transfers? Silence. What context explains your lies? Another silence. Finally, the prosecutor asked quietly, why didn't you simply tell the truth? Evelyn's composure collapsed. Tears streamed down her face. I was terrified. She gripped the witness stand tightly. I spent my entire life building something honorable. I couldn't bear losing it. You mean your reputation? My career? My marriage? My future? She looked toward the jury. I never wanted anyone hurt. I only wanted to protect the life I had built. The courtroom remained still. Her words carried genuine emotion, yet they could not erase years of evidence. Closing arguments arrived several days later. Prosecutors reminded jurors that protecting a reputation never justified corruption or murder. The defense urged them to consider reasonable doubt, emphasizing the absence of eyewitnesses to the killing itself. Judge Eleanor Watkins carefully instructed the jury before dismissing them for deliberation. Hours passed. Darkness settled outside. Families waited anxiously throughout the courthouse. Daniel remained seated alone. Marcus Bennett stood quietly near the rear doors. Evelyn stared motionlessly at the defense table. Just before 8 that evening, a courtroom deputy announced movement from the jury room. "All rise." The jurors entered solemnly. No one spoke. Judge Watkins addressed the foreperson. "Has the jury reached a unanimous verdict?" "We have." The clerk accepted the written form. She unfolded the document carefully. On count 1, judicial corruption. Guilty. Count 2, abuse of official authority. Guilty. Count 3, obstruction of justice. Guilty. Count 4, conspiracy. Guilty. A long pause followed before the final count. Count 5, first-degree murder. The courtroom seemed to stop breathing. The clerk looked toward Evelyn before reading the final word. Guilty. A quiet sob escaped Daniel as years of hidden deception finally ended beneath the weight of 12 unanimous voices. Evelyn slowly closed her eyes, realizing the courtroom where she had once defined justice had now judged her instead, leaving only sentencing to determine how the final chapter of her life would be written. Silence lingered inside the courtroom long after the jury announced its verdict. Judge Evelyn Harper remained standing beside the defense table, staring blankly ahead as though the final word had not fully reached her. Reporters rushed from the gallery to file breaking news alerts. Family members embraced quietly. Court deputies moved into position around the convicted judge, waiting for further instructions. Judge Eleanor Watkins scheduled formal sentencing for the following week. Until then, Evelyn would remain in federal custody without bail. As deputies secured her wrists with handcuffs, she glanced once toward the public gallery. Daniel remained seated alone. For a brief moment their eyes met. He saw no trace of the confident woman he had married decades earlier. Only exhaustion, only regret. He lowered his gaze without speaking. The deputies escorted Evelyn through a secure hallway leading toward the detention area beneath the courthouse. The heavy steel door closed behind her with a sharp metallic echo. For the first time in her career, she entered a jail cell not as a visitor, not as a judge inspecting conditions, but as a convicted prisoner awaiting punishment. 7 days later, the courtroom filled once again. Unlike the dramatic atmosphere surrounding the verdict, sentencing carried a quieter sadness. There was no remaining uncertainty, only consequences. Judge Watkins reviewed the jury's findings before addressing Evelyn directly. For many years, you represented the authority of this court. You were entrusted with protecting the integrity of our legal system. You violated that trust in nearly every way imaginable. The courtroom remained completely silent. The evidence demonstrated calculated corruption, abuse of public office, obstruction of justice, conspiracy, and the deliberate murder of your own stepdaughter to preserve personal secrets. Judge Watkins paused before continuing. The greatest tragedy is not simply that Claire Donovan died. It is that she died seeking truth from someone sworn to uphold it. Daniel quietly wiped tears from his face. Marcus Bennett lowered his head respectfully. Judge Watkins asked whether Evelyn wished to speak before sentencing. Slowly, she stood. Her prison uniform replaced the elegant suits she once wore beneath judicial robes. Gray streaks had become more visible in her hair during the weeks following conviction. She looked toward Daniel first. "I am sorry." The words barely rose above a whisper. "I destroyed everything." Daniel remained silent. She then faced the judge. "There are no excuses left. I betrayed the oath I took. I betrayed my family. I betrayed Claire." Her voice faltered. "I believed I was protecting the life I had built. In reality," she paused, struggling to continue, "I destroyed it myself." No one interrupted. For the first time since her arrest, Evelyn accepted responsibility without attempting to justify her actions. Judge Watkins nodded solemnly before delivering the sentence. On the conviction for first-degree murder, this court sentences you to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. A brief pause followed. For judicial corruption, 25 years. For obstruction of justice, 20 years. For conspiracy, 20 years. These sentences shall run consecutively where permitted under federal and state law. She looked directly at Evelyn. You will spend the remainder of your natural life in prison. The gavel struck once. This court is adjourned. As deputies escorted Evelyn away, she never looked back again. Months later, Blackwood State Penitentiary transferred Damian Cole into a maximum security federal correctional institution under the terms of his cooperation agreement. His testimony had exposed years of corruption involving prison administrators, financial intermediaries, and several officials who knowingly ignored irregular judicial requests. Federal investigators prosecuted multiple individuals connected to the scheme. Several prison employees accepted plea agreements. Others received prison sentences for falsifying records and facilitating unauthorized privileges. Damian's own agreement spared him additional charges related to conspiracy after prosecutors determined his extensive cooperation had dismantled the wider corruption network. Even so, his future changed very little. He remained behind reinforced concrete and steel. The only difference was a new prison, a smaller cell, stricter supervision. One afternoon, a correctional officer handed Damian a small envelope containing newspaper clippings. Across the front page appeared a photograph of Evelyn entering prison. He studied the picture quietly before folding the paper. The officer asked, "You all right?" Damian gave a faint, distant smile. "I suppose everyone eventually ends up where their choices lead them." He placed the newspaper inside his locker and never asked about Evelyn again. Outside prison walls, Daniel struggled to rebuild a life shattered by grief. The Harper residence eventually stood empty after he sold the property. Too many memories haunted every room. Too many unanswered questions echoed through the hallways. Instead of retreating from the world, however, Daniel chose another path. Using Claire's savings, life insurance benefits, and donations from supporters moved by her story, he established the Claire Donovan Foundation. Its mission focused on assisting victims who suffered abuse, manipulation, or retaliation by individuals holding positions of public authority. The organization funded legal assistance, confidential reporting services, counseling programs, and educational initiatives encouraging ethical accountability. Above the foundation's entrance hung a simple inscription chosen from Claire's personal journal. "The truth deserves someone willing to protect it." The words became the organization's guiding principle. Years passed. The courtroom where Evelyn once presided welcomed new judges committed to restoring public confidence. Training programs across the state incorporated her case into judicial ethics education. Law schools analyzed the investigation as a reminder that institutional trust depended upon personal integrity. Detective Marcus Bennett eventually retired after a distinguished career. When asked during one interview which investigation remained most unforgettable, he answered without hesitation. The Harper case. Not because it involved a judge, but because evil sometimes hides behind extraordinary respectability. His words appeared in newspapers nationwide. For many people, Claire Donovan became remembered not only as a victim, but also as a courageous young woman whose determination uncovered corruption powerful enough to challenge an entire legal system. Though she never lived to witness justice, her persistence ensured it eventually prevailed. Far away, inside a quiet prison cell, Evelyn often replayed the final conversation she had shared with Claire. She remembered the plea, "Tell the truth." She remembered refusing. Every anniversary of Claire's death, she wrote a letter she never mailed. Each ended with the same unfinished sentence. If only. No apology could change history. No confession could restore the life she had taken. No punishment could erase the consequences of fear disguised as love. In the end, the scandal became more than the downfall of a respected judge. It became a warning repeated in legal classrooms, investigative conferences, and ethics seminars for years afterward. Power without accountability invites corruption. Secrets protected through deception eventually demand greater sacrifices. And the smallest compromise, left unchecked, can grow into irreversible tragedy. Claire Donovan's determination ensured the truth survived even after her voice was silenced. Judge Evelyn Harper's desperate choices ensured her own name became forever linked not with justice, but with betrayal. Because sometimes the people entrusted to uphold the law become the very ones who destroy it. And every hidden secret, no matter how carefully buried, eventually demands its price.